Your barber thinks you work in insurance. Not health insurance. Not anything interesting. Something you said once 3 years ago and never bothered to correct. 4 haircuts since then. 4 chances to fix it. You never took one. That's not an accident. That's architecture. It starts the way most of these stories do. Not with a plan, but with a single sentence you almost didn't listen to. You're 27. You just closed on a duplex, $164,000, almost nothing down, because a small local bank still did that kind of lending back then. The man at the title company, Reyes, older, seen thousands of these deals, looks up from the paperwork and asks one question. You want this in your own name or an LLC? You didn't even know what he meant. You almost said your own name, because that's what ownership was supposed to feel like. Instead, you paid $89 to file the LLC. You didn't think about it for 2 years. By 31, you own 6 rental units, spread across 3 separate LLCs. A lawyer named Denise, hired for a lease dispute, tells you the rule. Never put more than 2 or 3 properties in the same entity. If someone sues one building, she says, you don't want them touching the others. You didn't understand why that mattered, not really, until a tenant slipped on an icy staircase, sued for $340,000. The lawsuit named the LLC that owned that one building. Never touched the other 5. Never touched your house. Never touched your name. By 35, it stops being a side project and starts being something else entirely. 6 LLCs become 11. 11 become a holding company that quietly owns pieces of them all. Denise calls it consolidating the tree. You call it Tuesday afternoons at a desk with a second monitor, moving numbers between accounts that have never once had your actual name on them. A business banker, Priya, 6 years handling your accounts, opens new entities for you without you ever walking into a branch. A registered agent in Wyoming, $125 a year, found with a single Google search, never once spoken to on the phone, receives your legal mail so none of it reaches your actual house. Wyoming doesn't list LLC owners in any public database, neither does New Mexico. You picked Wyoming because it was cheaper, and nobody makes documentaries about it. By 39, there's a trust. Not the kind people picture, no oak-paneled room, no reading of a will, just a document, drafted quietly, that owns the holding company, that owns the 11 LLCs, that owns the buildings, that house 41 tenants who pay rent to a property manager who hasn't needed you to answer a maintenance call in 6 years. The trust has a name that means nothing to anyone, words chosen specifically because they won't Google well, because most people get this part wrong. They think anonymity is one big dramatic decision. It isn't. It's 40 small, boring decisions made over 12 years, each one costing somewhere between $89 and $4,000, each one adding a layer that looks like nothing on its own. The third time you sit across from Denise with a full accounting, her office is smaller than you'd expect for what she charges. She flips through the folder slowly. 11 LLCs, 1 holding company, 1 trust, 2 private bank relationships, a small family office team, an accountant, a bookkeeper, a part-time attorney, none of whom have ever met in person, all reporting to you through a single monthly email. She looks up and says, "You know, on paper, you really don't exist." She means it like an engineer admiring a bridge. Structurally, not emotionally. You take it as the nicest thing anyone said to you professionally in years. That year, the number crosses $38 million for the first time, and she barely mentions it. She's more interested in whether the filings are current. To her, the money was never the point. The structure was the actual asset. There's a version of this story where you become someone else once the number gets big enough. You watched it happen to a classmate, Colton, a software exit at 34, spent the next 3 years making sure everyone he'd ever met found out about it. New watch, new truck, the one with the extra chrome nobody can explain. A boat he used 4 times a year and mentioned roughly 400. You saw him in an alumni event 2 years later, standing near the bar, talking loudly about democratizing access to institutional deals, wearing a jacket clearly chosen to be noticed. You were wearing a $34 fleece from a clearance rack. You drove there in a used Subaru with 88,000 miles on it, paid in cash. Someone asked what you did. You said, "Some real estate, nothing exciting." Technically true, almost entirely beside the point. Nobody asked you for money that night. Nobody's eyes did the quiet math people's eyes do. You left at 8:40, stopped for gas, paid $52 from your personal account, the one you keep thin on purpose, with about $6,000 in it. The real money doesn't live anywhere you, even in a weak moment, could easily reveal it. Your sister, Renata, doesn't know the number. She knows you do fine. She's a nurse, 41, divorced, raising 2 kids on a schedule that would break most people. 8 months ago, she calls on a Sunday night, in the voice people use when they've rehearsed something, and tells you she's $23,000 behind. Medical bills, a car repair, a landlord who raised her rent $200 a month with 30 days' notice. You could have sent her the money before the call even ended. It wouldn't have registered as a decision, roughly 4 days of what your bonds earn. You didn't send it that night. Instead, you asked her to send you every bill. You spent the following Saturday at her kitchen table, her kids doing homework in the next room, going through every line item, the way Denise once went through your folder with you. You find a billing error worth $4,100. The hospital fixes it in 2 calls. You find a payment plan nobody ever told her about. You help her write an email to the landlord citing a local notice period ordinance. The rent increase shrinks to something she can actually carry. By the end, the real gap is 8, not 23. You cover it. You call it a loan. You never say out loud that you're not collecting on it. You don't tell her about the trust, about the 11 LLCs, about a Wyoming agent who's never once heard your voice. Some of that is protection. If she doesn't know, she can't accidentally say the wrong thing at dinner. But if you're honest, some of it is something closer to grief. There's a specific loneliness in watching someone you love do math with numbers that to you aren't really numbers anymore, and knowing the kindest thing you can do is pretend the gap between you is smaller than it is. The structure gets tested exactly once, in a way that actually matters. A former business partner, Osei, who co-signed one deal a decade earlier, comes to believe, wrongly but sincerely, that he's owed a piece of everything since. He sues you personally. His lawyer, working on contingency, spends 4 months trying to trace assets back to your name. He finds the house, modest, paid off, worth maybe $410,000. He finds the Subaru, worth less than the tow truck it would take to move it. He finds a checking account with under $8,000 in it. He does not find 11 LLCs he has no legal basis to connect to you because the connecting document is a trust filed in a state that doesn't require beneficial ownership disclosure. The suit settles for $22,000, mostly because Osei's attorney realizes there's nothing left to find. You pay it from the personal account, quietly refilled months before the lawsuit was even filed. It doesn't feel like a win, exactly. It feels like watching a smoke detector you installed 9 years ago, for reasons you couldn't fully explain at the time, go off during an actual fire and do exactly what it was built to do. The 3-person team runs the same way the LLCs do, compartmentalized, load-bearing. Priya sees the accounts, not the trust. The attorney sees the trust, not the day-to-day cash flow. The bookkeeper sees the cash flow, but never the total, because no one needs the whole number to do their job. The fewer people who have it, the fewer people who could ever hand it to someone else on purpose or by accident. You are structurally the only person alive who has ever seen the whole shape of it at once. None of this is free. Denise's retainer alone runs $18,000 a year. Registered agents across 3 states, another 600. The whole arrangement, added up, costs roughly $54,000 annually, which sounds like a lot until you remember what 4 months of a determined plaintiff's lawyer almost cost you in the Osei case, and what it would have cost if he'd actually found something. you've stopped thinking of it as an expense. It's an insurance premium against a version of your life you have no interest in living. The version where people know, and knowing changes how they treat you, what they ask you for, how carefully you have to watch every room you walk into.
The number arrives on an ordinary afternoon in an email titled Q1 Samaya Consolidated. You're standing in a hardware store at the time, the plumbing aisle, holding a fitting because one of your rental units has a slow leak under a kitchen sink. You almost don't open the email. 14 quarters, 14 summaries that all look the same. This one says $38.4 million. You read it twice, the way you read something when you assume you've misread a decimal point. A man near you is comparing 2 cans of PVC primer, 18 inches away from someone whose holdings could buy the entire store, the shopping center, and 40 more like it. Nobody in that store knows. The cashier who rings up your $6 fitting doesn't know. He asks if you found everything okay. You tell him you did. You drive home with the windows down because the AC's been making a noise for 2 weeks you keep meaning to get looked at. You used to think a number like this would feel like a rival, that there'd be a version of you waiting on the other side of it, someone who finally got to stop being careful, stop being ordinary on purpose. Instead, sitting in your driveway with the engine off, what you feel is closer to what you felt the day Denise first said you didn't exist on paper. A kind of relief that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with the fact that the structure held, that nobody found you, that the maze worked exactly the way it was built to. Your sister calls that evening to tell you the landlord backed off the rent increase entirely. She's laughing a little, thanking you for the Saturday at her kitchen table. She has no idea what happened in a hardware store 4 hours earlier. You tell her you're glad it worked out. You mean it completely. The number sitting quietly in an account she will never see doesn't come up, because it was never really the point of the call. And lately, you're less and less sure it was ever the point of anything at all. The leak gets fixed the next morning. The fitting costs $6.20. 11 LLCs keep collecting rent from 41 tenants who will never know your name. A registered agent in Wyoming keeps receiving mail he's never had to explain to anyone. And somewhere in a spreadsheet, a number keeps compounding quietly, without ceremony, exactly the way it was built to, for a person who on paper, in the ways that matter most, has arranged to barely exist at all. This is a story, not financial advice. Always speak with a licensed attorney or financial advisor before making decisions about asset protection or entity structuring.